Hi there. I'm already really short and trying to make myself shorter just so that I can be a little bit in this video before all you see is the cooking pans and my hands doing the work. So this is a tutorial for baking with natural yeast. The tutorial is for cinnamon rolls, and funny story, and I'm gonna get to work as I tell you the story. Funny story, my oldest daughter, was livid with me this summer. So right now it's beginning of November 2022. This summer we had a family reunion, and one of my sisters was in charge of prepping and getting food ready for the family meals. And one of the meals was for breakfast. We were having the breakfast loaves with sausage and egg and cheese, and she made a ton of bread, 4 huge bowls worth of bread. I think it was a total of essentially 8 loaves of dough, and I'm trying to remember. I made, I think, 4 or 6 into the breakfast loaves, and just got to thinking, man, this is so much food. We need to make something else. And I hadn't made cinnamon rolls for years, for probably 12 years, maybe more. And I made cinnamon rolls with the natural yeast bread, and this is why my daughter was mad, is because I hadn't made them. She didn't remember ever having them. So here we go. I guess this is my confession, trying to redeem myself. This is not a permanent fixture in our breakfast lineup, but it definitely is. It's there. I don't know. It was just hiding. It's just hiding. So with the natural yeast, especially if you are trying to remain gluten-free, which means, because let's not forget that this is made with wheat flour, but with the natural yeast, through the process that it goes through, it denatures that gluten protein that causes inflammation, that causes the body to respond either, I don't even know how to describe it. Let's just say it's negative. For me, it's a negative. Yeah, let's get going. So we're gonna be doing this with drinking water. If you were reading a recipe from allrecipes.com or Googling some sort of cinnamon roll recipe, you're gonna have the instruction to roll your dough out on additional flour. So that is the step that we will be skipping today. Y'all, I live in Houston, and normally my entire house is essentially a proofing oven where it's humid and warm, but not yesterday. So I actually had my dough in the oven. It's one of my sister's tricks. So you're going to need 2 pieces of parchment paper. Now, the parchment paper is not something that we're baking with. We're using the parchment paper to push our dough out. So my dough was in the oven, not actually cooking. How you use an oven if your house is colder than 70 degrees, or yeah, that's about when I start putting my dough in the oven, if I need it at a certain time. So I made this dough last night. The dough has had 12 hours to process, but because of how cold it is in my house and outside, I knew that it wouldn't be ready for breakfast. So what I did was I turned the oven on preheat on the very lowest setting and let it warm up for about 5 minutes. 5 minutes only, because I didn't want it going to that full 170 degrees. I just wanted it at about 100 degrees. And then I put my dough in. I did that when I made it at around 4 or 5 p.m. And then I did it again after I took the dough out of the oven, preheated the oven again, and did that before I went to bed. And now my dough is perfect. It's ready to go. Enough talking. Let's get to the doing. So using drinking water and parchment paper. Excuse my husband using the compressor in the garage. I have no idea what he's doing. He promised he'd be quiet. Nope, not being quiet. Whatever. It's just, this is my family. Everyone else is asleep. I'm making breakfast. So we get into our dough, and to not be sticky, I use the water. That's how I keep my hands from sticking to the dough. And what I do is I go into the dough, and I split it in half. I take half of the dough and put it on the parchment paper with the drinking water. And using drinking water as needed, I start pushing it out. And I'm pushing it out on a bar pan. A bar pan is a large cookie sheet that has at least a 1-inch edge. And what that does is it just gives me, just like a shape to work with, because it's not going to be perfect, but what my goal is to get the dough as long, as wide as the inside of that bar pan. And as I push, I just kind of look for variations in the dough, squishing out where it's thicker than others and squishing in where it might be thinning. I'm wearing a sweater. Yeah. We went from, I'm not even kidding, we dropped more than 40 degrees in 24 hours. We were 87 since, September. Beginning of September, we've been 90s. October's 80s, high 80s. First week of November, no different. And then 42. That's all right. That means I get to wear my sweaters that I never get to wear. It makes cinnamon rolls. All right, so you can see, I've got my dough pulled out, and then I have ready a 9x13 pan. Already, you can see the butter in there. Has butter all throughout. Now, if you're vegan, what are your variations? What can you do? Well, I highly suggest a coconut oil that is refined. So refined coconut oil is processed to eliminate the coconut flavor. So it's giving you the oil that you want without any flavor, adding any flavor that you don't want. It's not hydrogenated, it's just refined. So refined coconut oil if you're vegan, butter if you're not, and we want cinnamon and brown sugar. My favorite brown sugar, do you all know there's two? So there's two different brown sugars. There's light or just brown sugar, or dark brown sugar. Dark brown sugar, oh, my favorite. The flavors that come out of that, especially for my gluten-free dark chocolate cake, cinnamon rolls, cookies. I'm just trying to think of things that I have on my blog right now. There's so many recipes that I've got that I haven't shared yet that I need to do that. Just dark brown sugar, peanut butter cookies. Try it once. You may love it, you may hate it, but try it because it might change your life. All right, cinnamon. Observe, I am not measuring. if you need to measure, it's a tablespoon. I'm looking at this from the perspective that I want a thick layer of cinnamon. If you ever purchase a cinnamon roll from Cinnabon, what's the best part about it? The best part about it is the flavor kicks you in the face. The only way you're gonna do that is by actually getting a layer on here. I mean, you don't want it lumpy, clumpy, so thick it's gross. But you need to put a layer on that you don't see the dough underneath. Brown sugar. If you're measuring, let me look at my recipe, hold on. Okay, so my clone of the Cinnabon is a 1/2 cup. Because we're splitting this between two doughs. So the original recipe from allrecipes.com calls for 1 cup, but it's not 1 cup per bread or dough item that we're doing, because we have split our dough because we're trying to work with a variable that they didn't have to deal with. The recipes that you look at online, if you are trying to be gluten-free, if you are trying to eliminate gluten that isn't processed with natural yeast, then you have to look at the recipes in a way that, I'm trying to describe this in the way that my process happened. But you have to look at it from the perspective that you are not trying to add any extra gluten. And when that happens, sometimes the steps change and you just have to realize that, okay, well, this is my recipe, but I've got to switch it up here. All right. We've got our layers of cinnamon and sugar. We're ready to roll this, but before we do, and my hands are a complete mess, I want to show you what I was doing earlier was getting a piece of floss, not a piece of thread. This is a piece of floss, and this is what we will use to cut the cinnamon roll. So once I have it rolled up, what I'll do is I'll reach underneath and slice it by going like that. Watch again. So I have the string here. It's gonna go underneath the dough. I'm gonna cross it and pull it towards each other. Maybe if I can get it like this, pull it towards each other. And what will happen is it'll just start slicing it. Because if you use a knife, you're just gonna push down and squish. If you use the floss, you pull up and it splits it. All right, here we go. So I start at the top of the parchment paper and just start rolling the dough onto itself towards the middle, pinching the ends as I go, just so that the cinnamon and sugar don't start falling out. So if you see me from there, you can see that I'm just pinching the ends here and rolling, rolling, rolling. And I'm just going back and forth, trying to keep the dough as tight as I can. Now that I'm towards the end, now that I'm towards this edge, oh my goodness, I just lost all of that. Hold on. That's what happens when you're trying to make a video. That's all right, we've got another one. We can maybe do a better job. Now that I'm at the end here, I'm gonna hold this, and I've got this extra dough on this side. I'm gonna take this dough on that edge closest to me and lift it towards the center. That way everything's just kind of situated in the best possible spot, so we don't have things falling out. All right, grabbing my floss, I go underneath the dough, and you may have to help it. You may have to lift it, move it. Then I'm pulling the strings towards each other and it slices it. Again, you've got a variable here, super sticky dough. Just do the best you can. And what we're going for is about 1.5 inch slices. I gotta pull this closer to me. And then you're just lining them up next to each other on or in the 9 by 13. So as I go, I'm just kind of scooping up cinnamon and sugar. I'll probably just take what fell out and dump it on top of these rolls. So when you're making the cinnamon rolls, you need to give yourself an hour, maybe 2 if your house is cold, for them to rise in the pan. This is actually probably the biggest reason why my daughter had no idea I knew how to make cinnamon rolls. It's because I'm lazy. Are you kidding me? Cinnamon rolls? That's a lot of work. Look at this. This is a ton of work. It's worth it, especially when you've got the frosting, which when I post this, I will post the cinnamon or Cinnabon frosting recipe as well. But one of the ways that I kind of, I don't know, cheat, get to be lazy, and still do a cinnamon bread is I'll use the dough and just make a cinnamon bread, whole bread, not just cinnamon rolls, because that takes a lot of effort and work, but just one whole dough. All right, so we've got half of our cinnamon rolls. I'm done washing my hands, getting ready for the second set. And you can see, this looks like an absolute mess. Absolute mess of deliciousness. So as those rise again, the dough rises a second time in the pan for the next couple hours. A lot of this space will be eliminated. So I typically, you can see in my pan, I go about 3 across. When I get to the end, if there's space to be used up, or I've got more cinnamon rolls than space, and you just squish things in. But for now, since I'm still working through my second set, I'm laying it out 3 across. All right. Sorry, this is such a long video, but this does take a long time to do. And I am faster when I'm not talking. Surprise, surprise. But again, the same thing, if your hands start getting sticky, this is why I had to do this over here at the sink. So I had the water. This is definitely not a video for the opposite side of the counter. Pushing things out, getting things as even as I can. And this is what I do for the kolache bread as well. Except with the kolache bread, I use the parchment paper as a bread form, stapling it as you go, because guess what? Staples are stainless steel. And totally put those in the oven. All right, last push. And I guess you could do the same thing here. Now that I'm talking about it and thinking about it out loud, we could do all these steps, skip cutting the cinnamon rolls into rolls, make some slices across the dough, and then make the parchment paper into a bread form, stapling it as you go, and then have 2 cinnamon loaves. Slice it later, right? How easy is that? See, look at that. Whole different recipe, one video. It's just different ways of doing it, different ways of looking at it. How do you need to serve it? I mean, if you start thinking about what is the functionality of how you need to serve your food, that might be a better way of going. And you still get those cinnamon roll type slices of bread, but maybe you need to feed more people. Maybe you need to travel with your bread dough, and that's an easy way to do it. It's almost like having a, you know, what's one of the easiest fruits to travel with? A banana, because it's in a peel. I'm looking behind me because I've got bananas back there. But having your bread in parchment paper, it's like a banana peel. You just peel it off when you're ready to eat, when you're ready to serve. I'm gonna have to do that next time. Maybe next time I've got a potluck or a breakfast that I need to cook for. I'm totally gonna try that. Take some photos. I might like it better because you can still do the frosting, the Cinnabon cream cheese frosting. If you're vegan, I'm sorry. I don't have a substitute for cream cheese. Maybe you do. Someone who's vegan, text me. Cindy Lunsford, text me later. Tell me if there's a cream cheese substitute. Maybe we'll figure out a recipe for y'all. Okay. Second set. Here's our second half cup. Let's be honest, this is looking more of like 2/3. But what we're doing, you and me. What I'm doing is I'm just pushing out the brown sugar so that I don't see the cinnamon. So the cinnamon covers the dough. That's what I'm looking for. It takes about a tablespoon, maybe a tablespoon and a half. And then brown sugar, I'm looking to cover the cinnamon. Once I have that, I'm done. And here we go. Getting our fingers wet so that the dough doesn't stick to us, and we just start rolling. I shouldn't say moving. We are rolling, pinching at the ends, the dough towards the center. Just working with what we've got. It's gonna be different every time. And then the conditions of your house change the variables of the natural yeast. Fun fact, with the yeast that I used to make this dough, I actually gathered it. I gathered it from my sister's house. My sister has, I wanna say a farm. I mean, she's not like headed to the farmer's market, but she has a huge property with acreage, and part of that acreage is a garden. And in her garden, she has an orchard. The orchard has apple trees and plum trees and other trees I can't remember. But the plum trees are what I remember because I was there in September and it had been a very long, cold spring this last year, so everything was late. Blackberries were late. Apples and plums were late, which totally worked out to my benefit because then I got to have those things. I grew up in Oregon. When I go to Oregon, it's one of my favorite things to go blackberry picking. I would never have guessed that as a 8 or 9 year old who had to pick blackberries as a summer chore. I have the scars to prove it. But you know, I got to go out every morning and pick blackberries. And my last morning there, I went into the orchard and got, I think I got about 3 or 4 plums off the plum tree. And they're just covered in natural yeast. So I know in my last video that I did, I started explaining what natural yeast was, but I never finished. I just went on a rant about something else, about what it wasn't. But what natural yeast is leavening agent that you find in nature. So the gray hue that you see on grapes is probably the easiest one to identify. That's actually natural yeast. It's not dirt. So it's something that you can gather. And you gather it by soaking whatever is covered in the natural yeast. In the grapes case, in my case, is the plums from my sister's garden. And so my last morning there, I went out into the orchard, gathered up the plums, stuck them in a big Ziploc bag, and brought them home. And I'd never done it before. I've always talked about it for years. And I gathered up the yeast, and I've let it process for the last couple of months. And these cinnamon rolls, you see them here. Can you see that better? These cinnamon rolls are a bread dough with natural yeast that I gathered from my sister's garden in Oregon. So natural yeast is something that you find in nature, and it's a gift. I love it. It's one of those things where it's just, when people talk about going back to nature, this is one of the first things I think about. This isn't a chemically, this isn't a manufactured fast-acting yeast. You have to be patient. You have to be mindful of what it is that you're doing and the processes that it needs to go through. You need to take care of it. It's a living organism. But the gifts and the benefits that it brings into my life, I really can't number them at this point. So I really hope that you all enjoyed this. I'm washing my hands so I can turn off my camera here in just a moment. But I'm grateful that you were able to spend some time with me in my kitchen. And if you have time, hop onto my blog, mamajosKitchenEats.blogspot.com. I'll put the link in the video notes. And yeah, drop me any questions if you have any, and enjoy your time in the kitchen. I have a saying over there on my wall: food is love. It's an expression of love. Use what you do in the kitchen to express love to those around you. Have a great day. Bye.